Hello, everyone. It's Ross here from Polar. We are back again with another virtual running clinic. Today, we are talking all about what are the best things to do to get prepared for your race. We know that it can be a really nerve-wracking time for everyone, so we're looking forward to bringing you expert tips to help you have your best run yet. With our experts, Benita Willis and Pat Carroll, we're going to cover what to do in the week before a race, how to have a really good plan on race day, and also their top pro tips and tactics to get you through to the finish line with hopefully an effort you can be really proud of. A quick note that across our virtual running clinics, we've covered some really helpful running content: building a running plan, how to recover well, avoiding injury, training and race nutrition, tapering, race tips, and today's content. If you've missed any of those sessions or want to revisit the pro tips, the easiest way is to sign up to the Polar Running Club, link on screen, and we'll get this straight to you. All right, let's get up and running. I'd like to pass across to John to introduce our first expert for this session.
Hey guys, John here from the Polar team. First up this evening, we have Benita Willis with us. Benita is a four-time Olympian and one of Australia's most successful distance runners. She holds multiple national records and has 22 years of experience as a professional athlete and coach, all the way from grassroots to the elite level. Benita is currently director and a running coach at Lace Up Running, a social running group based in Brisbane. Benita will be sharing with us some amazing practical tips that she's gained over all those years competing, so please sit back and enjoy. Now, I'd like to pass over to Benita and Ross from the Polar team. Do be sure to get your questions in about race week and race day into the chat box.
We are a little bit over a week away from our race. Could you talk to us about what you would do and what you would plan to make sure that you've got a really great last week before the run?
Yeah, so I'd even just make sure you know what you're wearing, what shoes, what gear, what gels you're going to take. Like, make sure you've got all that organised so you don't get to the last few days and you're not sure what you're going to do. And then carbohydrate loading in the last couple of days. So the last 2.5 days before the marathon, I would carb load. So just make sure you're eating carbs with every meal. So just make sure breakfast, lunch and dinner, you're eating good carbs and just getting that fluid in that you need as well. So you need those glycogen stores there ready for the marathon. And when you get to the race and you get to the destination, you're at the hotel and you're not training, just relax and enjoy it. And that's really part of the process of running a good marathon. So just have that in the back of your mind that this is part of the process, this is what I've got to do to run my best on race day.
And what were some of Benita's favourite carbs or things to eat in those last few days?
Oh, look, I used to eat pasta with tomato-based sauces. If you like pizza, even sandwiches at lunchtime are good. I always had pasta. Things like potatoes are good as well. I like chicken. I often had chicken as the protein with meals. I love in the mornings oats. It's probably really good. Or even things like crumpets, honey, bananas, even between meals like muesli bars, because you need a little bit of fat as well as fuel. So enjoy a bit of what you're eating.
Some really important advice there for race week. Are there any other key things in the week before that you would done, Benita, or just make sure that you'd planned in advance?
Yeah, look, I think just make sure you're planning all the logistical things that you need to do. Even sometimes if you think you might get blisters, if you've had blisters before in a run, just make sure you're taping up your feet on race day, even putting Band-Aids between. But I think the key is relaxation. This is a really exciting time in your training and your preparation, but it is really important once you get into race week that you don't train too hard. And a lot of people sort of think I'm going to cram in that extra running, and it's not like studying for an exam. With running, it's more about dropping the intensity, dropping the volume, having a couple of rest days, maybe 5 days out from your marathon. It's still important to do a little bit of running at marathon pace. So you could do something like 8 minutes at marathon pace and then a few 20 or 30-second strides afterwards that are a little bit faster. That's all I'd do as a little session. But then a few short, easy jogs on the other days, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, depending on your level. If it's your first marathon, I'd probably taper even more, so have even a few more rest days. So you're not going to get any fitter in taper week, but you can actually hurt the marathon if you run too hard and train too hard. And so you should have really tried out the shoes you're going to wear and just make sure, especially in the day before, you don't miss a meal.
So, Benita, the exciting days arrived. It is race day. If you could talk to us about some of the things that you would plan to make sure that you've got a really successful race day, that would be great.
Yeah, I think a really important thing is having a plan and sticking to it. So some people are just about finishing the marathon, where other people might have a time goal in mind, and just knowing what pace that is and having it programmed into your watch is a really good thing to do, or having pace bands and things like that. We know that at the race there'll be lots of paces, and I always think you can relax a lot if you stick behind a pacer. If you can stick in those groups, they always run really evenly. That allows you to relax probably the most. Make sure you know your nutrition as well for race day. There'll be plenty of water out on the course, but I think it's a really good thing to carry specific things like gels that you know that you're going to use, and gels that you're familiar with as well. And then when you get in the last sort of 10K of any marathon, I always just try to race it as much as you can. And that's the advice I give to people I coach. So don't worry too much about the pace when it's getting really hard. That's when you just got to be really tough, but focus on finishing as well as you can. And say if your pace does get a bit slower, don't stress. That often happens in marathons. The key is to stay positive and get through to that finish. When I ran 2:22 in Chicago for the Australian record many years ago now, the first 10K for me felt really hard. And I felt like, I can't maintain this and I feel like I should pull out. I was at the pace I wanted to be at. And then I felt awesome after that. And then I felt bad again. Then I felt awesome. So the key is to think that you might come out of it and back yourself and be really confident too when you're running. So if you've done all the training, just be confident that it's going to come off on the day.
Awesome. And I think another really key thing you've talked about is just making sure that you remain mindful about your hydration and nutrition.
So anyone that runs over about 2 hours 15, which is pretty much every one of us, the hydration and nutrition are a key component. And just make sure, even if you don't feel like you need a drink, take a few sips every 5K. I always think as a rule of thumb, every 5K you need to be having some water or some sort of sports drink, or taking a gel for every 5 to 10K. Don't run a marathon on an empty stomach. It's really important to have some sort of fuel. Get up very early. You're going to get up early anyway on the race day to get there in time. So make sure you have everything ready to eat as soon as you wake up. And that's going to be really good for you when you get later into the race. A big problem that you need to sort of think about before you start a marathon is not going too fast at the start. So we always feel awesome, we've carb loaded, we feel like we've got so much energy, we haven't trained hard for a few weeks, and we want to start faster. And a lot of people start faster thinking, I'm going to run a faster time than I've set myself, so I'm just going to go for it. But like, running is a very realistic sport. And if you haven't had the results in other races that predict a certain marathon time, you're probably not going to pull it out of the bag. So fitness doesn't lie. So don't just start faster and think you're going to be on for a faster time. So really stick to your pace in that first 10K. And that's the key to setting up a really good race. When you go over your plan and think about your plan, don't think about the race every day, all day. Just think about it a bit the day before the race, and then think about it again when you're warming up. And if it's going to be cold, just make sure you're not going to be shivering for half an hour before you actually start the race, because that's a waste of energy.
So Benita, for race day, what are the top 3 things that you recommend our runners must do?
Know your pace, stick to it, have a realistic pace in mind. The second one is nutrition. So just make sure you're really dialed into what you need to do. Don't stress about it. It's just something that you need to just be focused on every 5K, and then you sort of keep going. Try to be as relaxed as possible. And nerves are really good because you can use that adrenaline to help you in the race. Relaxing as much as you can. The longer you can relax in a marathon and just run in that really easy, relaxed state, the better you're going to finish at the end. So relaxation is really important and hard to practice. Don't warm up for too long either. A lot of people sort of get a bit excited. They're like, I'm going to warm up. Just remember that in a marathon, your warm-up is extended as the race starts. So you don't need to get too excited and warm up for too long before the race starts.
So Benita, and this is really great advice, but the top 3 things to avoid or not to do.
Don't start too fast. It's really important that you stick to your plan, even if you feel awesome. Don't forget nutrition, because nutrition is one of those things that you need to make sure you do it. And every 5K, I think it's a rule of thumb, and just one of those things that you need to prepare for that last 10, 15K right at the start. So it's one of those things that catches up with you if you start forgetting, or the first 15K, you're like, I don't need to take anything. So that's really important. Don't forget that. Just make sure you arrive nice and early and don't get there too late, and be just about what's happening.
Anything to mention about the tactics for the different distances? So 5, 10, 21, 42?
Oh, look, yeah. So if you're doing the 5K and you're just aiming to finish and you've never done a road race before, I would just be jog walking, not going too hard. But if you're actually really focusing on something like 10K, you can be a bit more aggressive with the pace. So going pretty hard the whole way, if you're training for it, it's fine. I always think with a 10K and a half marathon, they're quite similar in the sense that they've got a lot of the similar sort of training. So you still have an end goal of what sort of time you want to do. So, yeah, I think 5K, 10K, half marathon, you can be a bit more aggressive at the start. The marathon, you just have to be a bit more patient and diligent with your pace at the start. I find the 10K very hard because it's that intensity as well. They're all different in their own sense, but the shorter distance, yeah, just have a bit of a go, have a bit of fun with it and see what you can do. It's so important to just manage pace, especially when you're doing the marathon. So when you're in a race and your adrenaline's running red hot, you've just got to be careful not to go too fast. So with having a Polar watch, it's good to check your pace, but then also checking your heart rate too, because I think it's really important that you watch that your heart rate's not going too high. You know, some of my race that I did to qualify for London Olympics, I watched pace all the time and it was actually quite fun. And I was actually pacing a race on Sunday at the Mackay Marina Run. And with my Polar watch here, I was just making sure that I wasn't too fast or too slow. And it is really helpful to keep looking down, and you've got people sort of relying on you when you're pacing. So they're just relaxing as much as you can. But pace can be relaxing because you can just sort of check, okay, I'm good, I'm just going to relax and keep going like this. But if you check your heart rate and it is a bit higher, then that can be a sign. You got to know your heart rate zones, of course, but can be a sign to just back it off a bit and refocus and regroup.
Thank you so much for all your info, Benita. Any other final takeaways to help our runners on race day?
Oh, look, I think nerves is a big one. And I know with the people I coach at Lace Up Running, everyone gets nervous and they're nervous weeks out. And the last week before race is one of those things where you've got a bit of an anxiety about how you're going to go, and just make sure that you don't think about the race constantly. So I think my biggest bit of advice would be to have a plan. And I always give my runners a plan just a day or two before, and just think about it for 15 minutes and then forget about it. And just make sure you're sort of catching up with friends, or you might even want to run with some friends or something just in the last week, doing things that are going to help you relax. And even when you get to the race on race day, nerves can be really overwhelming. So make sure you've got some music or something that might distract you. You can think about the race plan when you're warming up and then sort of getting in the zone of the race.
Benita, unfortunately, I've got a little bit too excited and I've gone out a little bit too hard at the start of my race. What would you recommend that I do?
Yeah, and that happens to a lot of people. I've even done that in races before. And I think when you recognise it, it's really important to just let your heart rate go back down. Sometimes your heart rate might be jumping up too high. And to get your heart rate down, you need to be running as slow as you can, or even walking, or even stop for a little bit. And it's important that you slow down your pace dramatically to get your heart rate down. And even a few minutes of that can sometimes help you refocus and then get going again. But I would get going at a pace that's a little bit slower than what you were running. But don't beat yourself up that I've got to keep doing this pace. If you can't do it, you can't do it. But just slow down a little bit so you can get your rhythm back, and then you might get back on pace a few K later. So it's really important to sort of mentally refocus and pull yourself out of that as well. And some people take a gel at that stage, or they've got a gel with a bit of caffeine and they feel awesome, because the marathon is a mental game, and sometimes mentally you can lose focus and it causes you to go slower, even though your body can actually keep maintaining the pace. So when you take out a few minutes and just sort of mentally refocus, sometimes it can make a huge difference to your overall result at the end.
Is there anything else that you wanted to mention?
I think the biggest thing is that enjoying whatever race you're doing is probably the key factor that's going to get you the best result. But at the end of the day, you've got to enjoy it, because the happier that you feel when you're running and you're feeling in the last week, it does really reflect in that overall result. Don't sort of think that you're going out to battle and, you know, it's going to be devastating whether you do your time or not. Just think about enjoying it. Think about the process and the small steps, and just that end result, whatever it happens to be, that's the end result, and that's going to be good enough for whatever you can do on the day.
Next up, we have Pat Carroll. Pat is a 2-time Australian marathon champion, a 4-time Gold Coast marathon champion. He is the Australian all-comers record holder for the half marathon, coming in at a blistering 61 minutes and 11 seconds. Pat has coached hundreds of runners, both in person and via online coaching. He also heads up a social running group based in Brisbane. So again, please sit back, enjoy the info. There's lots of exceptional tips And again, get your questions into the chat box for the Q&A live afterwards.
Could you talk to us about what's your key plan or the key things that you would do in that week leading up to the event?
Your main objective is to be on the start line, feeling fresh and ready to go, almost to the point where people are holding you back from running. So you're reducing the volume of your training. Training will be going down to 50, 60% of what you normally do. And if you involve faster running in your training usually, then that will be reduced also. The duration of your reps will be reduced and the intensity of your reps will be reduced. Very important to make sure that you don't start the race feeling sore. So easing back in the last week or even the last couple of weeks. On top of that, you've really got to get as much rest as you can, as much sleep as you can. Generally speaking, people don't tend to sleep too well the couple of nights, especially the night before a major event. Just be prepared that that last couple of nights might be a bit restless. Make a pact with yourself that you're not going to entertain any negative thoughts. If any negative thoughts do start creeping into your mind, lock in what your diet's going to be. So eat healthy, ideally throughout your whole campaign, but especially in the last week. You're going to be focusing on eating healthy carbohydrates, especially in the last few days. You're not going to be consuming enormous amounts of food because obviously your training is going to be reduced somewhat. This is more for people doing the half marathon and marathon with regards to the increase in carbohydrates, not so much for people in the 5K and 10K, but certainly people in the half marathon and the marathon. You'll be focusing on your increase in carbohydrate intake over the last week. Potatoes, whole grain bread, pasta, rice, fruits and vegetables, even pancakes over the last weeks. Lock in what you're going to be wearing that you were familiar with in training and what worked with you. What shoes you're going to be wearing. My main thing that I used to address in my last week was anxiety, just to not get too worked up, because it feels like if you do think about it too much and you get worked up, you've almost run your race even before the gun has gone off. You're wasted before you even get there. It is difficult to reduce the volume of your training in the last couple of weeks. I would always have a very solid feel for what I was capable of pace-wise. Don't go sightseeing. You don't go for long training runs, staying off your legs. Go to the movies. A lot of time where you are staying off your legs, you're still consuming normal servings of food, but just the concentration of them will be high in carbohydrate.
So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you would go through and structure a nice plan there so that I guess you can take the stress off yourself, but you can manage a really successful day.
Certainly locking in what you're going to be eating the morning of. No doubt that you've been trialing your final week's diet, also trialing what you're going to eat the night before and the morning of, so that's all locked in now. It's important to do a bit of a dry run or think about how you're going to get to the start line, because with the Gold Coast, it's over 20,000 people getting there. So that's a lot of cars trying to park in the area. So maybe have some sort of plan whether you get dropped off or whatever, that you are going to be able to get to the start line a good 45 minutes before your event. Lock in beforehand where the toilets are. If you do need to go to the toilet, then realise that when you get there, there's going to be a queue. Warm up for a good 15 minutes, whatever you normally do in your warm up, whether that be some strides, stretching, whatever your normal routine is. Most people would have got their race kit together the night before and shared it with the world on social media, which is fantastic. If you want to do something which makes your name more visual, because if you're maybe going through a bit of a bad patch and someone on the side of the road calls out your name, that is just gold.
Any last suggestions in terms of how to manage nerves and anxiety on the day?
That's a great question. And that's the one that I had a lot of problems with earlier on in my career. But how I got over that is I thought to myself, well, I'm getting really worked up here and really anxious. But when the gun goes and we start running, I feel fine. And then I thought to myself, well, I'm going to tap into that feeling of what it's like when the gun is fired off. I had one of my clients who ran the Brisbane Half Marathon last weekend who only just reported back. And she said to me, Pat, I was really nervous before the event, but once the gun went off, I felt fine. So there's a clear indication that such a feeling doesn't change as years go on, because I felt like that 30 years ago, and here's someone now experiencing the same thing now. So lock in what it's like when the gun is fired, because when you're running and it's happening, it's actually started, the wait is over, you're doing it. I have never felt nervous in a race. Once that gun is fired, I have felt sensational. And it's almost like, oh, thank God, the wait is over. I'm in this place now, which is fine. So yeah, tap into what it's like when the gun goes off. With regards to your fluid intake, you'll be focused on being hydrated all the time, but you don't want to be overhydrated. So the best way to gauge that is the color of your urine. If your urine is completely clear, and you're going to the toilet all the time, then possibly you're just overhydrated.
If you could talk to us about the top 3 do's and don'ts from Pat, that would be really awesome.
Lock in a realistic pace. So whether it be the 5K, the 10K, the half, or the marathon, 99.9% of us are focused on that finish line clock and the time that you're going to achieve when you cross that line. So ideally, you've had a healthy campaign and you've got a very good idea as to what you are capable of. And ideally, your first kilometre will be the same pace as your final one. Arrive at the start line with heaps of time to spare, whether it be an hour, just get yourself to that start line as faultless way as possible. Visualize yourself achieving your goal. So visualize yourself waking up Monday morning and more than happy with what you achieve. Because come Monday morning, you can't change it. But during this week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, you still got an opportunity to make it happen.
What are the 3 biggest mistakes you see runners making in the last week or on race day?
Main things there would be your diet. Don't play around with your diet in the last week. Don't entertain negative thoughts. So just don't allow the negative thoughts a second of your time. So I used to have a trap door in my mind, and if I remotely thought that a negative thought was about to fester, then I would close that trap door. You're not getting in. You've locked in a realistic pace that you're going to involve for your event. Once that gun goes off, then it's very easy to get caught up in the hype and the excitement of the day. There's always a large crowd around the start-finish line there at the Gold Coast. So don't let that completely smash your race day plan. Before you know it, you're 5K down the road and you're 2 minutes ahead of race plan at 5K. And that can really come back to haunt you big time in the closing stages of your race, especially in the marathon. Very important not to get caught up. Run your race. Don't run anyone else's, or don't get sucked along by the energy in the pack at the gun. Just run your own race.
If you could take us through just some of the key points that you might have across the 5, 10, the 21 and the 42.
5 and 10K, you've got to be realistic about the pace you can achieve. But you can afford to really challenge yourself there at a pace that might be a little bit out of your reach, because the blowout's not going to be that great. But the difference between the half marathon and the marathon is you really can't afford to be experimental on the day. Nutrition really starts to be a factor in the half marathon, and it is 100% a factor in the marathon. So you really need to address that.
Is there any other general advice that you'd like to pass on to our runners?
With regards to the nerves one, I'm possibly a gold medalist in that department, being overcome by nerves, but I did get to the point in my career where I thought, this is just crazy. This is starting to affect the way that I perform. So, as I mentioned before, just started to tap into that feeling of what it's like when the gun goes off, and just having faith in your preparation. Food the night before, just keep it simple. Pancakes are great. Go with pancakes. They taste fantastic and certainly serve as a great form of carbohydrate. Keep it simple. Veggies, some potatoes in the oven, some sour cream or something, but just a great sort of simple concentration of carbohydrate there. If you're on the Gold Coast, book in advance where you're going to go out for dinner and make sure you're going to be able to cater for your needs and also the time you eat. So if it's a hot day, you wear a hat. And when you go past an aid station, just grab a cup of water and just throw the water over your head. That'll help cool yourself down. Make sure you don't pick up the electrolyte instead of the water, because that's going to end up being a bit sticky. So make sure it's the water you pour over your head, not the other. And yeah, if you've gone out too fast in a marathon or a half, just slow down as soon as you can, because the longer you maintain an unrealistic pace for, the sooner it's going to come back to haunt you in the business end of the event. So save yourself every step, even the way you breathe, even the way you hold yourself, even the way you don't tense up, because every second is consumed with saving yourself at the business end of the event.
Any other words of wisdom?
I think adopting a mantra, you're going to get tired regardless of the distance. But if you can somehow try and stay in a relaxed state while you're working hard, it sounds difficult, but it's possible. The folk that are watching, they may have seen Kipchoge in recent times when he's run his amazing times, close to 2 hours in the marathon. You look at him, often he's smiling. You even smile just to convince yourself you're feeling good. Because if you go the other way and you convince yourself this is tough, maybe the occasional smile and a mantra. So I used to use relax. So if I found that it was starting to get a bit challenging, I just say relax to myself. Even say the word out loud, not too loud, but just say the word out loud. Relax, breathe within yourself while you're running. Just check in, how do my calves feel? How do my quads feel? Let's relax my shoulders just a little bit. Just loosen my hands up a bit. Maybe even look around a little bit occasionally. You don't want to be sightseeing, but there's nothing wrong with taking in the sunrise and just appreciating. Think about appreciation. Appreciate the fact that you're injury-free, you're healthy, and you're able to run, because there's millions of people who would wish to be able to do what you're about to do. You're the envy of the world, that you can actually compete in a marathon, because there's so many countries that they just can't hold marathons. So be appreciative of the fact that you have an opportunity. Don't tie up. Just relax, still stay focused, relax, appreciate the opportunity, just do your best.
That almost brings us to the finish line for today's session, everyone. We hope you've enjoyed the content. If there is one thing we've heard, it's how critical it is to manage your pace and heart rate on race day. If you haven't already, it would mean a lot to us to check out the all-new Polar Pacer and Pacer Pro running watches via the link on screen. They're beautiful, light watches, purpose-built for runners, starting at $299 with free delivery direct to you in a few days. Thank you so much to everyone who has taken part in our content throughout the series. Next, we'll be talking about race recovery and what to do after a race. So do stay tuned to the Polar Running Club. If you are in training or have a race coming up, all of us at Polar wish you the very best. If you'll be on a start line for any of the Gold Coast Marathon events, we'd love to see you, so do come and say hi. Be safe out there, and the very best to everyone for a great final preparation for your race.
Thank you.